Okay, everyone. Hello. Welcome back. So my name's John, and I'm one of the open research librarians here at the University of Manchester. So welcome. If you've not already been welcomed, I'm sure you have. So this is the first of our sessions with multiple talks. So I'm sure you're all excited to hear we've got three great speakers lined up, so that's great. And what we'll be looking at in this particular session just before lunch, open research in communication and publishing. So what we're going to be thinking about this morning is how the open research movement promotes innovation in research communications and publishing. So first up, we've got Georgia Vesma from the University of Manchester. So welcome, Georgia. And she's going to really take us into the nitty-gritty and the complexities of interdisciplinary peer review. So take it.
I think I've got a lab mic, so I'll use that.
Yeah,
All right, hi everyone. Everyone can hear me, I think. Just to let you know, I'd hoped to print out my notes this morning, but I'm going off handwritten notes. So if I slow down, it's because I can't read my own handwriting. It's good to see everyone here today. So my name's Georgia, and in my day job, I am in the research development team in the Faculty of Humanities. So I help academics put together their research proposals, hopefully get their research funding. But I also have a bit of a sort of portfolio around interdisciplinarity and how people collaborate across disciplines. This has been an interest of mine since I started in my role. And then I have been fortunate this year to be an Open Research Fellow with a project that I ambitiously thought would do loads of stuff around interdisciplinary collaboration and open research, and has kind of started to focus down on how do people publish together? How do interdisciplinary teams get anything published? Quite often the answer is with a great deal of difficulty. And we're going to be looking at one aspect of that. So today I'm going to be sharing, I'm not going to say anything along the lines of deep dive or anything like that, some early thoughts on how blind peer review practices work or don't work for interdisciplinary research. These are also really text-heavy slides. I wasn't really thinking when I put them together. You don't need to read the slides. I'll say things that relate to them, but I'm sure they'll be circulated afterwards. So we'll start with a quick overview of what is blinded peer review. So this is still the most common form that peer review takes. It can be single blind, where reviewers know the identity of the person or people whose research they are reviewing, whose publication they're reviewing, or double blind, where in theory no one knows anyone's identity. This is what we would call the gold standard. Proponents of double-blind peer review claim that it protects authors and reviewers. It addresses potential power imbalances, say where a junior colleague needs to review something written by someone more established. And it encourages reviewer candor. It enables reviewers to be honest about what they think without fear of recrimination. And its critics point out that double-blind peer review doesn't result in greater author diversity compared to a single-blind approach. And that anonymity can prompt bad reviewer behavior, which probably all of us have encountered in the form of reviewer 2, that sort of mythical figure who doesn't get it and is horrible about it for no good reason. So there are some question marks about whether double-blind peer review is at all compatible with what we might think of as best practice or open research best practice. And it's worth noting that none of this is specific to interdisciplinary research. These are all sort of general comments. The alternative is obviously open peer review, which actually describes quite a diverse set of practices, which we'll get into a little bit later, but can include open identities, open reports, open participation. There's lots of different ways that peer review can be more open, and many of these have been experimented with or put into practice. I would note that that is much more in the physical sciences and the biomedical sciences, much less in the social sciences and humanities, which remain more resistant to open peer review as a way of assessing the, to use a word that's maybe been highlighted as risky, the excellence of a publication. More on that later. So then, there's domain differences in what expectations are of peer review and what it's supposed to do, and even how it's done, which raises questions then about how peer review is done for interdisciplinary research. We're told that interdisciplinary research is the future. It's certainly explicitly named in our university strategy. Most other higher education institutions will have interdisciplinarity built into what they claim to want from their research. Anyone here who's actually participated in interdisciplinary research will tell you it is much, much harder to get that research recognized, starting at the publication stage, but actually sort of throughout, when you're thinking about your promotion, when you're thinking about the ways that you might communicate about your research. Interdisciplinarity makes it more difficult for it to be recognized within a system that's structured in a very disciplinary way. So this is where my Open Research Fellowship comes in, thinking about how that might change or how that might work. And asking, are existing models working for this mode of research, which we're told is going to be really important for solving these wicked problems of the future, you know, climate change, et cetera, and requires interdisciplinary research. Are we actually even able to publish it under current formats? So what did I do? I started with a survey. So all of my research was conducted within the University of Manchester. As I mentioned, my role is not an academic role. So I am a member of the professional support staff. So it made sense for me to kind of stay within our ecosystem for the questions that I was asking. So I started with a survey of 164 self-identified interdisciplinary researchers at the University of Manchester across all 3 of our faculties. This visual shows, I've used yellow and blue to indicate the reviewers and reviewees. So people who had received review as an author of an interdisciplinary publication and people who had acted as a reviewer for at least one interdisciplinary publication. I'd note, of course, many of you will already have made this connection. Most people, if you have been a reviewer, you've probably also been an author. There's plenty of overlap and mobility between those categories. And you will also be able to see that there are some, even in my quite small sample size, there are some pretty obvious discrepancies. Because I work in the Faculty of Humanities and people know me there, people were way more likely to respond to my survey if there was some name recognition. So this is biased towards the humanities and social sciences. I'm choosing to see that as a good thing because a lot of existing research about open publication in particular is more focused on the physical sciences and the biomedical sciences. So I'm trying not to worry about the fact that it's just a load of people who know me who responded. Also a big bias towards people who consider themselves to be established in their career rather than early career, which probably has something to do with the kinds of publication and reviewing opportunities that open to people in their early career, what they can and can't take on. What the big theme of this talk, by the way, is going to be me caveating my data. Like, I did what I could. So my survey asked quite a broad suite of questions about interdisciplinary co-authoring and publication. And I included this one, which was, if you have authored an interdisciplinary publication, rate your experience of peer review from -5 all the way up to +5. And there are some trends, which are perhaps the least interesting trends of all time. Well, one of them's sort of interesting. So humanities and social sciences researchers were more likely to report satisfaction, were a little bit more satisfied with the process. People in their established career were more likely to be satisfied with the process, which possibly just refers, you know, is an artifact of having had more experience, of sort of having been on both sides of the divide, of having sort of explored peer review in different ways. And then the not interesting trend is that if you had not been rejected after peer review, you were much more likely to be satisfied with the process than if you were rejected, which sounds like a non-finding. But if we don't know what drove those rejections for interdisciplinary papers, then we actually don't know if this is kind of sour grapes or if there's something happening in the process that isn't working for interdisciplinary research, which means I had to do some qualitative research. So I interviewed 12 people, 5 of them primarily in their role as a reviewer, 5 primarily in their role as a reviewee, 2 editors. As previously mentioned, these are really mobile categories. If you're an editor of a journal, then you will have also held the other 2 roles. It actually turned out that some of my reviewers were also editors and just hadn't told me. So the interviews were unstructured enough that we could explore some of that. But two main themes came out, one of which we will term the reviewer crisis, and the other one we'll call the black box. So the most common theme that was discussed is assembling the appropriate expertise to review interdisciplinary research. Kind of goes without saying, you would think, that to review something interdisciplinary, you need the right reviewers. You need enough people on the team that all aspects of the paper can be commented upon. So reviewers and reviewees wanted a disciplinary mix, or maybe an expertise mix that reflected, we're using a method from this discipline, but on a problem that exists in this discipline. So you want expertise from both areas. And reviewees in particular thought that reviewers should be themselves interdisciplinary scholars in some way, have some experience of what it's like to work across the disciplinary divide. Editors made it clear that this was just not possible. This is what I mean about text-heavy slides. It's a lot of quotes. I'll summarize the quotes for you. So in this top quote, the reviewer maintains that it is the job of an editor to assemble the right team to review every paper. And then the middle quote in blue, the editor basically says that's not possible. Under the reviewer crisis that we're experiencing, where there are more and more papers being submitted for review and fewer people willing to do the unpaid labor of reviewing, this editor claimed to be sending out between 80 and 100 invitations to review to get a reviewing team of 2 for every paper. So you're not going to be building a bespoke team for every paper. You're going to be taking what you can get. And then an interesting perspective from someone working in a disciplinary specific context. So one person who I interviewed said that it was their disciplinary norm that you just get one reviewer. So if you are publishing something interdisciplinary in a particular journal where their norm is one reviewer, you've got no chance at all of assembling the appropriate expertise. You will just get that one person's point of view. So we can't assemble the perfect team. What are reviewers and editors doing instead? Reviewers described quite a lot of different strategies for when they were asked to review interdisciplinary research from outside their area of expertise. All of my reviewers, I should say, reported having been asked to review something that was from way outside of their area of expertise. But there were a few strategies highlighted for people in their advanced career declining to review. This was not an option that people in their early or mid-career took, possibly because they didn't feel confident doing so, or because they thought it would be the right career move at that time to accept a review. Ooh, I'm gonna have to speed up. Yeah, so that was one strategy for advanced people, signaling or rating their confidence in their review, where they felt confident in what they were saying, where they didn't, and feeding back to editors where an additional review was required, and finally asking their colleagues for help. So in this set of quotes, one of the reviewers suggests it's a good practice to be clear on your expertise, and the editor responds saying it's actually not helpful when a reviewer indicates that there's an aspect of their review that they're not confident in. So it seems like even where reviewers are trying to introduce some kind of best practice that will result in a good review, editors aren't necessarily taking on the responsibility to deliver that. What are editors doing? They're trying to balance reviewer disagreements and mismatches where those occur. So this is something that obviously also happens with single discipline papers, but where there is a difference between the two reviewers, a strong difference, one of the things that particularly affects interdisciplinary research is that both reviewers might be equally right. They might just be right about their bit. So how do you balance the decision? Editors talked about seeking third opinions, and reviewers also reported that they felt sometimes that they had been overruled by editors. So on this slide, I'm going to highlight actually that middle quote from the humanities editor, because I thought it was particularly interesting. They're talking about being fair. If they feel that someone's come back with an unfair rejection, they seek a third reviewer. But that puts it back in the hands of editors. So then the whole point of it being double blind, the whole point of it being in some way a sort of fair process goes back to the hands of one person. And that's also picked up in the comments from that bottom reviewer who felt that the editor, knowing that the author was a big name, overruled a review and sought a third review to get the outcome that they wanted. So even my very small sample size revealed that there's inconsistent practice, not just between journals, between individual editors, between individual reviewers, actually between the same reviewers on different articles, depending on their expertise. And all of these inconsistencies are facilitated by the double-blind peer review. Here's an example that I thought was interesting because it's disciplinary in nature. Someone from the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health said that a lot of the journals have a box where you rate your confidence. I asked someone from social sciences if you ever encountered a box like this while reviewing for social science journals. Absolutely not. So there's no sort of standard practice in that regard. In this case, reviewers who had asked their colleagues to contribute to their reviews or to support them with their reviews where they didn't have the total expertise to comment. One of them, who wasn't sure if it was officially allowed, did this without revealing that they'd done that. And then the other one told the journal explicitly that that was the path they had taken, and the journal didn't contact the people that they had named. So the black box, we might say, is kind of concealing some quite dubious practices in terms of transparency. So does open peer review offer the solution? Well, open peer review isn't one thing. According to Tony Rosslauer, it's 122 things. I think in practice, it is, you know, a cluster of different activities. And there are some things that might be particularly useful, but they might also be they might also bring their own problems. So for example, open reports where the editor, like the reviewer report is visible afterwards, might encourage reviewers to be more considered and to engage more with where their expertise is. It doesn't actually solve the problems of a team that doesn't have the right expertise. Open participation might enable us to bring together the right expertise to review a paper with lots of different disciplines involved, but then it's more and more issues for authors to respond to, and it probably pushes more the ball back into the editor's court. But what if we considered the review of interdisciplinary research to be a kind of interdisciplinary practice of its own? So under this concept, informed by open review principles, but single blind, an editor could assemble a team just as they would usually, and then that peer review would be produced collaboratively. My time is up. So I will move on to the questions, and people can ask me what I mean by this. Before I do that, I'm just going to say, I know that this is something that raises more questions than it answers. So I'm also going to preempt loads of questions that I can't answer in what's considered kind of a pro move. But yeah, I'll call it that.
Thanks, Georgia. That was great. We do have time for a question. Sorry, it was fairly strict with the instructions on raising those cards. But if anyone does have a question for Georgia, we'd be glad to take that now.
Hi, Judith Carr-Edgehill. Based on your conversations, would you think then something like the eLife thing where people publish and then it gets commented on would be a better way of doing interdisciplinary research reviewing?
I'm going to say yes, but what I'm going to say is that I think it would be better because most things would be better, I think. I think any critique that could be leveled against that kind of approach, I could be wrong on this, but isn't the main one just that you end up with only quite a small number of people who actually engage that way? You sort of, it's like a comment section where people with an axe to grind do engage and most people in the middle maybe don't. But I think open participation on review could be good for some interdisciplinary research, perhaps especially the sort of challenge driven. But I think anything would be better than double-blind peer review right now, because I do think it might be holding up the publication of good stuff.